Hi everyone. Even though it is March, we're going to be talking about the first Thanksgiving and religious freedom today. But before we do that, I want to do a quick review. Which southern colony was the first permanent English settlement? I hope you're thinking Jamestown. When you're thinking Jamestown, I want you to think what their cash crop was. And I hope you thought tobacco. In addition to tobacco, what were the other two cash crops in North and South Carolina? So in addition to tobacco, there was rice and indigo. Which southern colony is classified as one, even though it's geographically located in the middle Atlantic? That would be Maryland. Which southern colony was started as a place for people in debtor's prison to start a new life? I hope you're thinking Georgia. Remember, Georgia was also a buffer between the Spanish settlements in the south and other English settlements to the north. Remember, Maryland was also started as a safe haven for Catholics. And what southern colony did English settlers interact with the Powhatan and have contact with the Powhatan named Pocahontas? I hope you're thinking Jamestown. The king in today's read aloud, James I, was the father of King Charles I, the king we heard gave Maryland as a gift to Sir Calvert. So we're going to go to a different region from the south. We're going to go to the New England region. And we're also going to go back in time from King Charles I back to James I. On a September day in 1620, about 100 or so men, women, and children boarded a small wooden ship that was nestled in the English harbor known as Plymouth. This ship, called the Mayflower, was bound for New York, North America. You really have to wonder why people would put their lives at risk to sail across a large ocean in an overcrowded ship. They must have had some very good reasons. I'm sure you remember King James. Jamestown was named after him. Well, King James was not just the head of England at the time. He was also head of the Church of England. And King James took his job as the head of the church very seriously. He felt that the Church of England was the only established church in the country and everyone should be part of it. The king believed if you didn't support the Church of England, you might not support him as king. So King James did not allow people to follow any other religion. Anyone who broke this law could be severely punished. In fact, many people were imprisoned, killed, or forced to leave the country. So as you can imagine, this law made lots of people unhappy, especially those people who wanted to be free to worship as they wanted. Two groups in particular were angry with the king. They were the Puritans and the Separatists. The Puritans actually belonged to the Church of England, also known as the Anglican Church, but they believed that the Church of England was not strict enough. They wanted a stricter or purer way of life based on how they interpreted the Bible. The Puritans wanted to stay in the church, but they wanted it to be pure or free of beliefs they didn't believe in. The Separatists, or separating, on the other hand, wanted people to be able to worship as they pleased, even if it did mean separating from the Church of England. King James refused to listen to either group and viewed them as nothing but troublemakers. Frustrated and unhappy with the king, a group of separatists left England for the Netherlands in 1608. In the Netherlands, they could practice their religion without fear. However, about 10 years later, a group of them decided to return to England because they missed their homeland and their culture. They had a plan, though. They did not intend to live in England. Instead, they were going to board a ship and move to a new land, a land that would be their own. They decided to go to Virginia, and King James was delighted. William Bradford was an organizing leader of this group of separatists. Bradford had persuaded the Virginia Company to allow them to make the trip. He also persuaded the company to give them a small piece of land to settle on when they got there. If you recall, it was the Virginia Company that had paid for the English settlers to travel to Virginia in 1606. Before setting off, these separatists became known as pilgrims. The word pilgrim is a word to describe a person who goes on a pilgrimage or journey for religious reasons. It was thought that this word best described what these people were doing. And so this is where we begin. In September 1620, as the Pilgrims boarded the Mayflower, it is important to note that not everyone on the Mayflower was a pilgrim. There were military officers, adventurers, merchants, craftsmen, indentured servants, and would-be farmers too. Because they were not part of their church and the Pilgrims were not familiar with them, the Pilgrims called those people on the board the ship strangers. Regardless of what they were called, all these people wanted a better life and were willing to put their lives at risk for it. The journey to Virginia did not start out well. With very strong winds, the voyage was a difficult one. The winds were so strong that they battered or beat on the ship and blew it off course. It took more than 2 months to complete the journey, and when they finally arrived, they did not land in Virginia. At the first sight of land, the captain insisted that they drop anchor. Although those on board were happy to see land after 2 months on board, it soon became clear they were not supposed to be where they were at. For one thing, the weather was much colder than they had prepared for. Because they were far north of the area granted to them by the Virginia Company, the Pilgrim leaders on board drew up a plan outlining how their colony would be governed, even before they landed the ship. Right there on ship, they decided what the rules would be and who would make them. The main objective or goal of the group, which included both Pilgrims and the so-called strangers, was to work together in peace and fairness to make their colony work and be a success. This document, written by William Bradford and the Pilgrims' religious leader, William Brewster, became known as the Mayflower Compact. Most of the men on board the Mayflower signed the agreement, 41 of them to be exact. Once again, women and children were not included. Today, the Mayflower Compact is a very important document because it was the first document in the English colonies to guarantee self-government. The group sent an exploratory party in a rowboat to investigate the coastline while everyone else remained on board the ship. The men in this party encountered the Wampanoag Native Americans. The two groups shot at each other with muskets, bows, and arrows. The English party advanced and explored a land that became known as Provincetown at the very northern tip of Cape Cod, which is in the state of Massachusetts. Based on information provided to them by that exploratory party, the Pilgrims and others did not settle in the area that became known as Provincetown. Instead, they sailed further up to a rocky harbor area called Plymouth, which was fitting because the group had first departed England from the port of Plymouth. Some historians have recorded that passengers on board the Mayflower took their first steps in North America when they alighted onto a large granite boulder on the shoreline. This boulder is known as Plymouth Rock. Though some believe the story of the Pilgrims landing on this specific rock, it may just be a legend. What we do know is that the date was December 21st, 1620. The Pilgrims have arrived in North America. Sadly, though, the settlers were not prepared for how bitterly cold their winters would be in New England. In addition, the journey had been so terrible, many of them were already sick. Without warm clothing and shelter, and with very little food, one by one the settlers began to die, and almost half of them died that first winter. Spring could not come quickly enough. When it did, the settlers got to work experimenting with planting seeds for crops and building homes. One day, a Native American named Samoset appeared in the colony. Surprisingly, Samoset spoke some English. Samoset told the settlers about a Native American named Tisquantum, also called Squanto, who not only spoke English but had been to England and Spain. It was clear to Samoset that the English settlers needed help, and he went to get it. Before long, Squanto arrived with the Wampanoag chief, Massasoit, and it appeared the settlers had arrived in an area inhabited by the Wampanoag. Squanto was not actually a Wampanoag, but he joined the tribe when the people of his own tribe had died from diseases brought to North America by explorers and traders. Squanto believed that the Wampanoag would trade with the settlers. He advised Chief Massasoit to make peace with them. It is believed that Squanto showed the settlers how to grow crops such as corn, squash, and beans, the three sisters, in the New England soil. Squanto also showed the settlers where to hunt and fish and which local plants were good to eat. As their crops grew in the warm New England sunshine and men hunted and fished in the woods and rivers, the settlers became more optimistic. And so when the first fall came, the settlers had enough food to see them safely through the next winter. They were very grateful. They were grateful to God, and they were grateful to the Wampanoag. It was time to hold a celebration of Thanksgiving. One of the settlers wrote that Chief Massasoit came to the Thanksgiving celebration with 90 Wampanoag men. The occasion lasted for several days as the settlers and their guests feasted on deer, duck, lobster, fish, cornbread, pumpkin, squash, and berries. They hunted, played games, and ran races. This celebration of Pilgrims and the Wampanoag is often called the first Thanksgiving. The friendship and relative peace between the Wampanoag and the settlers lasted for many years, even decades after Squanto's death. Eventually, however, as more and more new settlers poured into this area of North America, the friendly relations broke down. But for now, in this part of our story, this new land and new life with the religious freedom were very much what the Pilgrims had hoped for. Thanks, guys. Talk to you later. Bye.